Trump's first tough battle with the deep state of the United States, Powell's of the Fed, Quashing Congress and the markets, and Musk end of the Fed. Pampered rich technocrats, the myth of independence and the powers of the Senate. The first battle that Donald Trump will fight against the Washington establishment is against the head of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell. It is a high-stakes battle as it will judge the course of the economy, but it will show the intentions of the new government in terms of how far it will seek to exercise its power in the difficult form at the beginning. Because it's not enough to denounce the deep state, Trump must dismantle it totally in practice. In a characteristically charged clip from FOMC press conference on Thursday, November 7, two reporters asked Jerome Powell about the prospect of Donald Trump's asking him to resign. The first reporter asked, "Would you resign if Donald Trump asked you to?" Powell responded with a resounding no, followed by silence. Moments later, Powell was asked by another reporter if it was legal for Trump to either fire him or demote him, that is, remove Powell as head but keep him on the board of governors. To this, Powell curtly replied, "Not allowed by law," while his term ends in May 2026. Apparently, Powell wishes to leave no ambiguity about his position and takes a fighting position. One would agree that the spirit of the law says this, that a president cannot remove a Fed chairman except on an allegation of some sort of a misconduct. But the ambiguity remains. Even defenders of the Fed independence myth concede that Trump could potentially remove Powell. Experts who spoke to ABC News acknowledged that there is some legal ambiguity about what kind of behavior would be sufficient cause to impeach the chief, but said a disagreement over monetary policy is unlikely to meet the provisions of that provision. But Trump could try to overrule Powell and let the courts interpret the law, experts added, noting that the case could end up in the Supreme Court, which is dominated by conservative opponents appointed by Trump's first term. Trump could try, says Alan Blinder, an economics professor at Princeton University and a former vice chairman of the Federal Reserve. It's unlikely that he has that power, but if he does take it to the Supreme Court, I don't know what to expect how the Supreme Court will decide. But instead, he could keep Powell in his seat on the Fed's 7-member board of governors, but demote him from his role as chairman, Blinder says. This is a subtle manipulation that has never been tested, Blinder said, acknowledging the lack of clarity about whether it would be allowed. "We can't answer that definitively," he said. In any case, he will likely have to spend some serious political capital if he wants to remove Powell through presidential power. The market and monetary policy. I don't think I should be allowed to order it, but I think I have the right to make comments about whether interest rates should go up or down, Donald Trump told the Economic Club of Chicago last month. Pierre-Olivier Gourinchas, the IMF chief economist, told the Financial Times that central bank independence is one of the great achievements we've had in the last 50 years. Anything that would go in the direction of reducing the credibility of the central bank to fight inflation is potentially a problem, and markets may interpret it as a declaration of war. Trump will settle into the White House at a time when the Fed is debating how quickly to cut interest rates to a level that no longer constrains growth, but also keeps upward price pressures in check. Markets are ready to punish any wrong move, as they recently showed in Britain. And that will require a careful balancing act. After the Federal Open Market Committee decided to cut interest rates by 1/4 of a point, there is the opportunity for political tensions if the Fed does not cut interest rates as quickly as Trump would like. Powell did not rule out raising interest rates again if economic conditions worsen. A warning to the president-elect amid fears that his plans to impose sweeping tariffs, mass deportations of immigrants, and lower taxes could reignite upward pressures on prices. Policy intervention in an environment of resurgent inflation would be a disaster scenario, said Sebnem Kalemli Ozkan, an economist at Brown University, and markets would interpret it as a direct attack on the authorities' independence. The pampered technocrats. However, Powell's apparent disdain for the president-elect should cause us to wonder why rich pampered technocrats like him act as if their removal is some kind of violation of the law. Central bankers are just bureaucrats, and their removal should be no more dreaded than the removal of an Undersecretary of Agriculture. That's a view that Trump administration is expected to develop. Congress should fire Powell and not stop there. Regardless of what Trump's legal powers may be, it's clear that Congress has the power to remove Powell, just as Congress has the power to abolish the central bank entirely. Congress should, of course, abolish the Fed entirely, but if members don't have the stomach for that heroic act, Congress can start by amending the Federal Reserve Act to make it clear that the Fed chairman is not a sacred person if inviolable authority, unlike the mere mortals who are actually elected to run the federal government. There are many ways Congress could approach this issue. For example, Congress could revise the law to allow Congress to remove the federal chair with a majority in each house. It does not really matter as long as the bankers get the message that they are not special cases compared to ordinary mortals. Limited Fed action, what needs to change? Congress could make some other critical changes as well. Congress should prohibit the Fed from buying assets of any kind. That would end the Fed's habit of buying mortgage-backed securities and treasuries to prop up the banking class and Powell's cronies, namely Janet Yellen and the Treasury Department. And it would also end the Fed's ability to manipulate interest rates, as the Fed's main tool here is so-called open market operations. The second key change that is much needed is the elimination of the Fed's so-called dual mandate. As the Fed often likes to state, the Fed has a dual mandate of both fixed prices and maximum employment. Congress should immediately repeal the mandate to achieve the maximum employment rate, because the only purpose it has ever served was as an excuse for the central bank to inflate the money supply and issue inflationary money. As is clear from the Fed's press conference and publications, the Fed has consistently justified its tax policy in fulfilling its inflation maximizing mandate. And that is, the Fed often says something to the effect of, "We embrace easy money policy because our dual mandate to maximize employment says we must." Congress should simply delete the mandate. By the way, the Fed actually has a third mandate. It's to keep long-term interest rates moderate. Stripping the Fed of its power to buy assets probably nullifies that mandate in any case, but Congress could also remove any doubt and completely prohibit the Fed from manipulating interest rates of any kind. The independence from the Fed has never been used for good, the Franklin Roosevelt tradition. Of course, if Congress were to attempt any of this, the Fed's representatives in the media and in Congress will try to talk about how such things are unprecedented and we must respect Fed independence. Media insiders of the Fed often claim that efforts by elected officials to rein in Fed technocrats violate long-standing rules, respecting the Fed's independence. This is a factionalized version of the story. There is now and never has been such a thing as Fed independence, because the Fed always willingly helps the regime it serves. Early on, the Fed's independence did not even exist in theory and was expressly limited by law. Before 1935, the controller of the currency, as it was then called, and the Secretary of the Treasury were involved in Fed board, and thus ensuring a direct line of communication from the White House to the Fed. In 1933, of course, Franklin Roosevelt issued an executive order ending the gold standard and ordering the Fed to turn over all its gold to the Treasury. This was Fed independence under the left's favorite president of the 20th century. Even after 1935, it was understood that the Fed would always assist the Treasury with funding whenever necessary. This became evident again during World War II, when the Fed actually helped raise funds for the war effort. The Fed agreed in 1942 to peg interest rates on government securities. The Fed also engaged in a series of price control measures and regulations designed to help the White House. Only after the monetary agreement of 1951 was there a de jure direction to give the Fed autonomy in setting monetary policy. Yet the Fed has never used any of this supposed autonomy to do any good. We have seen this demonstrated countless times as the Fed has always happily done its part to ensure the Treasury gets what it wants. From the Fed's attempts to finance federal deficits in the 1970s, the Plaza Accord in 1985, and the flood of easy money since 2008, the Fed has never used its so-called independence to really rein in the government waste. The protection of banks. What matters to the Fed is protecting the banking class. Central bankers have never been interested in Fed independence as a way of limiting government power. By its own historical account, the Fed has now allegedly been autonomous for 60 or more years. Inflation and federal spending were they more subdued during this period? Probably not. Obviously not. The Fed has always and everywhere been willing to enrich the state, regardless of the levels of autonomy it could achieve. The real reason the Fed wants more independence is that the Fed can also more easily enrich the banker class while keeping the Treasury Department happy. That is, the banking cartel that works with the Fed is deeply interested in controlling who gets the board of governors and who gets to be chairman. The elite bankers are perfectly willing to serve the Treasury effectively as long as the cartel has its own people running monetary policy. This is how the banking class ensures that its monopoly powers are protected. Competition is crushed and bailouts are always on time. If the Fed finds itself at odds with the elected government, it is only if the priorities of the elected government conflict with the priorities of the Fed, which serves the interests of the banking class. Experience makes it abundantly clear that the central bankers do not face endless price inflation, but the Fed wants to act in a way that benefits the banking cartel the most. This is why Powell and the Fed are so opposed to the idea of him being removed from office. And here there is no higher authority governing the decisions. There is only power, and who wins will be determined by the result. And the Fed, Musk's slogan for Trump to take the helm of monetary policy. Tesla and SpaceX CEO Elon Musk, the billionaire backer of President-elect Donald Trump, has backed the idea of allowing presidents to intervene in Federal Reserve policy. In response to Thursday, November 11th social media post by Senator Mike Lee, Republican Utah, which called for the Fed to be under the president's direction, Musk on Friday posted the 100 emojis that's used to show agreement. Although brief, Musk's comment reflects a broader lobbying campaign for Fed independence that could take shape under the next Trump administration. And this is from Banking News. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support. Please support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.